Thank you for coming. I've wondered what parts of this sabbatical to share with you, but hopefully there'll be some chances for questions at some point. So if I missed stuff or anything you're interested in that you want me to say a little bit more about, I'm happy to do that. So what I thought I would do is tell you a little bit about what a sabbatical is before I even start, especially as it relates to the church. We'll do some definition work, and then I can get a little bit more specific. So first, what is a sabbatical? So a sabbatical is derived from the word Sabbath, which is a time of leave, and it's typically taken in the 7th year. And in September, I just started my 8th year, if you can believe that. So I took my sabbatical right at the end of my 7th year. And what is the purpose of a sabbatical? This is from the diocesan, our diocese here in Washington. And I adapted it a little bit from how it's written for the diocesan staff. But I wrote this actually because I'm the head of the HR committee on the diocese. So I wrote it. So the copyright is, okay, right here. So a sabbatical is intended to provide the rector with enough distance from his or her day-to-day responsibilities in order to cultivate a renewed sense of mission, purpose, and direction for his or her ministry. Typically, this is achieved through study, rest, spiritual renewal, and mission realignment, so that, and that's a big word there, the rector can return and contribute even more fully and energetically to the ministry and mission of the church. Now, a little bit about the rector sabbatical at St. John's. So this is from my letter of agreement with the church, my contract. So the rector accrues 1 month of sabbatical leave per year of service to the parish. Such leave to be available after the rector has completed 6 years of service. So in the 7th year, a rector may take a sabbatical of 6 months. So those of you who are counting, how long was I gone for? 3 months. So technically, there's still 3 months of sabbatical time, and I'm thinking about how to use that and when best to take it. And I'll share a little bit more about that in a little bit. But let me first go back to these pieces: study, rest, spiritual renewal, and mission realignment. And what I tried to do during my sabbatical is to honor this as much as possible. I've had extensive conversation with Bishop Mary Ann Buddy about how sometimes rectors think of their sabbatical as just go on a 3-month vacation, right? Complete checkout. And that's not the intention of a sabbatical. And so what I tried to do primarily is to study and travel. And for me, study is self-explanatory, but rest, spiritual renewal, and mission realignment all happened during my travels, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But first, I'm going to start with the boring stuff, and then we'll get to some of the pictures about the travels. So first, about the study. So some of you know this, but I started a doctoral program in 2012 that then I ended up pausing on. And the reason I paused it is that I started the vision process at St. John's, and it really was where my heart was at the time, and still now. And so what I did is I paused on my studies and so that I could put all my attention into the vision process. Because if you think of the vision process and the work that goes into it, it was kind of like a second job. You know, there's running the church, and then there was this thing that we were doing over here. And I couldn't do that and my doctoral program at the same time. So I only had time for one other big thing that I was doing. So we reached a point in the vision process where I felt like it was time for me to go back and do a little bit more study and education so that I could help take St. John's to the next place with the vision. But the reason that my doctoral work relates so perfectly to the vision work is because of this. First, what is a doctorate of ministry? It's called a DMin. It's not a PhD. It is an advanced professional degree that builds and increases capacities for wise, skillful, faithful Christian leadership. And I'm doing it at Virginia Theological Seminary. My specific doctoral focus is called a DMin in ministry development. Now, look at this definition and tell me if this doesn't sound like what we're doing with the vision. Students of ministry development focus on the building and strengthening Christian communities and on the bridge building and connecting of Christian communities with their surrounding neighborhoods, towns, and cities for the sake of common mission, common good, and a living witness of God's good news. So I basically spent my time at Virginia Theological Seminary this summer. It was 3 weeks. And I spent the time really focusing on St. John's. And there were several pieces that took the most of my attention. One was studying about becoming a better leader. It was a course that I took called Moral and Ethical Leadership. And it was there that we focused on the primary responsibility of an institutional leader to doing institutional care. So that is the primary responsibility. We talked a lot about that. The second thing is I took a class in community organizing and bringing your church into the public sphere. And that was I'll tell you about that in a second. And then the third one that I took was a preaching class. And that also brought some insights that I want to share with you. So I'm going to take 15 minutes to share with you a little bit about what I studied, and we're going to engage with that because that was the heart of my education. And then after that, we'll look at some pictures of where I traveled, and then we'll have some time for questions. Does that sound good? All right. So some of the main concepts, and I wrote these down and forgot to take them up here. I just want to be at least somewhat organized in how I present this. Here we go. So this summer for me was a time of deep insight. There's always the professor talking and teaching about specific things, and then there are the things that you're hearing and that you're applying to yourself and to your context of ministry. And one of the things that I found a lot of insight from was the vision process thought that I was doing during this class on community organizing. Now, just to give you a little context, most of the kids, or the students in my group, were in contexts of ministry where their churches were not in affluent areas, right? They were in rural places here and there. And so when they were talking about making a difference in their community, they were really focusing on things like, I remember someone saying, we have a huge thing with meth addictions. And so how can we help bring rehabilitation to our local community? And others were saying, yeah, I'm totally in an inner city, urban setting, and we have a lot of homelessness, and that's what we're trying to work on. I was the only one that was just like, yeah, I'm in like the Bethesda bubble, and it's like, it's wealthy, we don't have problems, healthy, wealthy, wise, super educated. And so we're discerning at St. John's, how can we make a difference in our local community? So what are the issues? And so I kept pushing back. When it was like, I got to do community organizing, I'm like, yeah, but what are we organizing for? What are the things? So I ended up writing a 24-page paper, and the intention of this paper was how to take the vision team and our process of discerning how to be engaged in our local community and to make a difference and truly partner with the community in creating a more health and more altruism, more kindness in our local community. And so this paper is intended for the vision team to read. And I'm not going to share it with you yet because the vision team hasn't read it. But it has very specific pieces in there. And one of the pieces that I was really attracted to was this idea of relational meetings. So first, one of the main concepts is the iron rule. And this is one of the things I took away with me. Who knows what the iron rule is? Okay. Never do for someone what they can do for themselves, right? And so you have the golden rule, and then you have the iron rule. And the iron rule is one of the foundational pieces of this thing called the Industrial Areas Foundation. You would know that based on what we have. It's under the umbrella of the Industrial Areas Foundation is something called Action in Montgomery, which we have here in Montgomery County. And it's all about community organizing. Some of us are starting to twitch when we hear Action Montgomery because of some history we had in this church with trying to become a member of AIM. But Action Montgomery started essentially under this umbrella of the Industrial Areas Foundation, which started in the 1930s in Chicago, is all about community organizing. It's about how do you speak power to power. So if you want to change structures, you can't just do it as individuals. You have to do it as communities. And you apply pressure, and you really change politicians' minds based on how you sway them. And so it's an interesting thing. We might talk more about it as time goes on. But this idea of relational meetings is the organizing groundwork. Is that if you want to make a change in a local community, first you have to find out what people care about. And if you find out what people care about and they have passion around it, then you can galvanize that passion and you can work with it to help them organize in order to make the change. So I came out from the D-Min with this very clear idea. What we shouldn't do is say we are going to do something for our local community. Instead, we need to work with the local community to help figure out how we can have a common mission together. I will at some point, for those of you interested, once we kind of run it through, share this paper with you. But the heart of it is that we need to get to know our local leaders, and I especially need to build relationships with them. So starting last week, every week I'm trying to have a meeting and to get to know one or two of our community leaders and just go out with them for coffee, build relationships, and then, so we're bringing it down a little bit, so that eventually we can talk about having a common movement and a common vision for BCC. Much more about that to come. We won't spend any more time on that right now. Another thing that came up, which I think you'd be interested in, is someone asked during one of the classes, what metaphor would you give to your congregation? This is during the preaching class. If you could use a metaphor to describe your congregation, what would that be? And people are coming up with all kinds of really cool things, and I just couldn't figure it out. We're in the heart of the DC area, right? We have a lot of energy here. People love coming to St. John's, but we also have these real worlds that we go into. You know, we can talk about loving your neighbor, but then you're going back into your political world, right? Some people here work at the Pentagon. What does it mean to love your neighbor and then go work at the Pentagon, right? So these are real issues. So I really struggled with this. And so you know what image I came up with? This is my metaphor. I hope you don't find this insulting. You guys know what that is? That's a concrete pavers driveway. Let me tell you why this is what came to me. Is I feel at St. John's, what we try to do is recognize that there are real structures in our lives that we really can't move, right? There are, professionally in DC, we are constantly interacting with situations and contexts that demand practicality, right? So you can't really be super ideological when we go into our workspaces, especially in the political field. And so what we're doing is not asking people to quit their jobs, right? What we're saying is there can be context and connection and life in the midst of the inanimate objects of our lives. And so and others maybe, I'd be really curious, and I'm going to open this up in a second, what metaphors you might use for St. John's. So the way I saw this is we're going to make the in-between as green and as lush and as life-giving as possible so that some of these concrete slabs don't feel so lifeless. And so then how can we work on that together? So out of curiosity, given our time, when I said what metaphor might you use for St. John's, did you have one in mind? Go ahead, Ellen. A spider with 8 legs. Oh, please say more. I like that. It's something a little more organic than that. Yeah. That's nice. Any other metaphors that came to your mind to describe this church that you've been a part of? Nancy.
This was so obvious. To me, it's a crossroads because we are all crossing at different kinds of things in different times.
Yes, the crossroads. That's one of the things I liked about that, because it had some crossroads in it, but thank you. Building community at the crossroads of faith and life. Aren't you glad there's grass in the middle? Just think about what it would look like. All right, another really big thing that I worked on this summer was the role of anger in my life and your life. We often think of anger as a bad thing, something to be avoided. But what I came to see is that actually, anger can be one of the most powerful tools that you have to work with. Why? Let me back up a little bit. I want to ask you first to think about, and if you have something to write on, I promise you this will be good for you. You have your phone with you, whatever, if you want to itemize it. But I want to ask you to think about what makes you angry. Like what makes you angry in life? Scenarios, circumstances, actions that people take. What makes you angry? Maybe we don't have time to all write this down, because y'all are looking at me like, all right, okay, we got it. It's helpful if you have something in your mind with this. I came up with a list of things, and at the top of the list was, I feel super angry when people use the Bible to oppress others. I feel super angry at that. It gets under my skin like nothing else. And then the next question is to ask yourself, why does it make you angry? What story, what experience do you have in your life that makes that particular thing so agitating to you? So think of what makes you angry. Go back to the story. Is there a story in your background that touches on this? I knew immediately. Why do you think, knowing me and my background and my culture, I'll just give you a little hint there. Why do you think it makes me so angry when the Bible is used to oppress people? So, come on, someone interact with me. I feel like I'm doing all the talking. It's so obvious, because I'm Palestinian, right? I remember being in 11th grade, and no, excuse me, it was before that. It was, I think it was like 10th or 9th. There was a guy who had come to my, the church complex where I used to live. My dad was an Episcopal priest. And he was talking, I'd be asking him like, hey, like, where's your mom? I never see your mom. He's like, oh, she's always praying. And I'm like, she's praying? He's like, she prays 8 hours a day. I'm like, what? And that sounded like the weirdest thing to me. Anyway, what I realized is that his family were missionary families. They had come to Israel, Palestine to pray and to just make a difference among the Jewish people. But he's the one that exposed me to this thing I'd never heard before. I grew up in the church, and that was that Palestinians didn't belong in the land because God gave it to the Jews. And I remember going like, that doesn't sound right, And then I became exposed to this thing called Christian Zionism. Anyway, then I come to Alabama, and people in Alabama really knew how to use the Bible to oppress people, right? And then it wasn't just Palestinians. It was all kinds of issues that I was seeing. People oppressing, saying that these people who practice this are excluded, people who look like this are excluded. And I had this sense of like, I can identify with that. That makes me angry. So if you'll notice in my preaching, I never, ever, not once, will justify using the Bible to say that someone is excluded. Why? Because that comes from my anger, which comes from my life story. So what makes you angry, and how has it shaped you, and how has it impacted the message that you bring to this life? That was so big for me. All right, I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to ask, are there any questions related to that before I move on? Okay, Becky.
So, sir, you said one of your courses you talked about there was a primary your primary responsibility was to institutional care.
Yes.
And that was significant to you. And my question is, as opposed to what? And what things in your experience do you find distract you or deviate? Like, what do you see as institutional care? As opposed, like, what do you say no to keep your focus in your job on institutional care as opposed to what else?
Yeah. Do you know this hallway right here? There's pictures of former rectors on it. The way I understand institutional care is that my job is to leave St. John's in better shape than it was when I came. And I feel that looking at that row of pictures, that every rector, I hope, came in with, and they received what they had, and they took St. John's to a new place. Not necessarily new to stroke my own ego so that I can use it as a stepping stone to get to the next place. We know people who do that, right? But my job is to do what is in the best interest of St. John's. One of the ways that means is when I come to the church, and I tried to do this, I didn't make changes in my first year, right? Why? Because my responsibility wasn't to bring in all my great ideas into the church, but to listen to this culture and respect the culture, and then you build trust, and then you can make changes together. So one of the big complaints I think about institutional leaders can be is that they make changes and people don't feel like that came from them. Now, I remember my first year, I made a big change. I think we talked about this. I changed the way announcements were made. Do you guys remember that? Woo, I heard about that. That was like within, it used to be like during announcements, there was a line of people just coming up to make announcements, free for all. Who feels like saying something this morning, you know? And so I changed it. I said, okay, from now on, announcements are just going to go through me because I have a responsibility to the timeline of this service. But that was one of those things, like a change possibly made top down too early because people felt like, oh, that erodes trust. So there is this idea of how to listen to the congregation and how to work together. Like, for example, if eventually I feel like institutional care for me is helping St. John's become more engaged in its local community. I feel that, I hear that. But if eventually I feel like St. John's is not interested in that, I'm not going to spin my wheels making it happen. I'm going to figure out instead what makes St. John's beat. Where is the passion? And maybe we go with that. So I think it's about your agenda, pushing your own ideas versus listening to what happens from within. I'm sure there's a lot more in there. I did a whole paper on communication, when and why and how to communicate, and it was all through this lens of the primary purpose of communication is not just to be heard, but it's to develop moral leaders in the church. It's a tool you use to develop institutional care. So anyway, I wrote more papers this summer than I saw twitching if I think about them. One more question maybe before I move on. I want to make sure we have time for this. These are a list of some of the books I read this summer. Can you just appreciate how many books that is? Like, not only did I write these books, but I wrote annotated bibliographies on them. But that was one of my favorite things this summer. I read a book a week. I just took it in, because I don't get to do that very often. All right, let me talk a little bit about travel. So some of you know I went to two places, both related to my own spiritual journey. One is I've always wanted to go to Italy. I've never been to Italy. That is really where the birth of the Western Church. And so I was fascinated by it. And I wanted to go to Thailand for a number of reasons. We've never been to Asia before. And Tannery, my wife, is she here? She's a Thai masseuse, if you guys didn't know that. If you're interested, Thai massage is amazing. I get free samples of that. So she was going to go for a training, and I was like, perfect, because I'm really interested in Buddhism, and I'd like to learn a little bit more about it. And just be in it. You know, you can learn from a book, but just to be there. So let me just show you a few things. So sad, all my pictures were on my iPhone, and I had to reset my phone because it did some weird stuff, and I lost all my Italy pictures. So these are taken with Tannery's phone, but I was there, and I love these. You'll like this. Look at this. Gorgeous woman sitting next to a nun, but the nun's the one got the cell phone, you know? So I just thought I just love that. That was on the subway. A picture of St. Peter's Square taken from the top of the basilica. No one ever told me this, but I'm assuming that's a sundial. Has anyone ever noticed that? That definitely looks like a sundial to me. Especially, I gauged it, and where the shadow is of that little thing right there was right around the time where I was standing. And of course, the Sistine Chapel. And I want to tell you, while I was in Rome, I had a special revelation. And it was kind of like God reaching out to the Episcopalian in me. And I want to bring you this special revelation. All right. I know we have an alcohol policy here, but I couldn't let that one. Okay. And it's always fun to see the Pope when you're in Rome. So what was fun about this is we were there on a Wednesday. That's when the Pope makes his appearance. I took that picture. And there were so many people there, and the Pope was on his Pope-mobile, right? But what was awesome is that when he is behind the crowds and you can't see the car, he just looks like he's like just like floating with his hands like this. And he's floating fast, you know? And like the other really amazing thing about this were how emotional people were to be around the Pope. I'm not Catholic, and I teared up. I mean, it was so amazing to see him take children and just, who's seen the Pope in real life here? Has anyone met the Pope? No? People would pass their kids like 6 or 7 rows forward. You know, here's my baby. I hope to get it back, you know. And you know, the Pope is trying to, you know, he's trying to hold them and kiss them, and the kids are like, you know, screaming. And so that was such an awesome moment for me. Do you see the Pietà right there? I loved that. I wanted to spend time with it because, as you know, the Pietà was vandalized a while back, and now it's behind glass. But that was a really powerful moment to be there and to see that, and to think, for me always, to think about the people who have made pilgrimage just to see that and to be in that space. This is holy ground, even if it's not your particular denomination. Another thing that I found really moving is Michelangelo had another Pietà that he made. And you'll see this one at the Duomo Museum in Florence. And there's a debate. Most people think that that person in the back, you see the guy, that his face is actually Michelangelo's face. That he put that in there. And this is what's amazing is that Michelangelo made this to put it on his own tomb. But he shattered it, he destroyed it, right? Completely destroyed it with a hammer. And it was after his death that people put it back together. Why did he destroy it? It's because he had this thing, this not just perfectionism, but he really believed in the art that he was making. And he was trying to create art that touched the holy. And for him, it wasn't just like, hey, look what I made. It was like, is this close enough to touching the holy? And he decided it wasn't. But even more amazing is this quote that it's a sonnet that he wrote, and it's found right next to this in the museum. I want to read this to you. He wrote this toward the end of his life. The course of my life has now brought me through a stormy sea in a frail ship to the common port, where landing we account for every deed wretched or holy, so that now I can clearly see how wrong the fond illusion was that made art my idol and my king, leading me to want what harmed me. My amorous fancies, once foolish and happy, what sense have they now that I approach 2 deaths, the first of which I know is sure, the second threatening? Let neither painting nor carving any longer calm my soul turned to that divine love that to embrace us opened his arms upon the cross. That's Cinque Terre, one of the 5 cities. This trip was just Tannery and I, by the way. All right. Thailand. So let me just say, first impressions of Thailand? Exhaustion. Never fly China Air China. All right. Let me just show you a few images of Thailand. These are Buddhist monks. Now, here's what's cool. In Thailand, most young most children become Buddhists at some point, Buddhist monks. And so you can become a Buddhist monk for a while, and you go to Buddhist schools. That's where the best education is. You get your education, but you don't have to take your vows. Only those who choose to make this a life thing are the ones who take a vow. So these are just young boys who will end up, just like you and me, not monks. I guess I'm kind of a monk, but I talked about this last week. This is a monk right here in the morning going for his alms walk, and you'll see he's got a bowl in his hand, and these two people, one is bowing, another one is on the floor. This was so typical. You give an offering and then you receive a blessing. So they're really, in Theravada Buddhism, there are no givers and receivers. Everyone's a giver, everyone's a receiver. So they feel that they're receiving more than they're actually giving. This is what it looks like riding in the back of a tuk-tuk. These guys are insane, right? They go so fast that even like growing up in Israel, Palestine, driving, I'm just like holding on to things. This was really cool. We walked into this temple. Who remembers what a temple is called in Thailand? A wat. By the way, if you go to Thailand, please do me a favor. We met so many people who were like, oh yeah, I've been in Thailand for a month. We're like, oh yeah, have you been to any wats? They're like, what's a wat? Right? Know what a wat is. This like Thai culture is 94% Buddhist, and this is the culture. So these are actually columbariums. Isn't that amazing? And it's so beautiful. And on the front of each one is something about the person, and there are pictures of them. So it's just like they just do it really nice over there, I guess. Some more images, and then the kids practicing. A lot of poverty in Thailand, which accentuates this idea of generosity that I was talking about. There is a lot of poverty, but they are so generous in their giving. Colorful, really colorful. Crocodile heads. I didn't try crocodile meat. I just couldn't do it. Has anyone tried that? All right, a few of you. Now, very colorful, but when you come a little closer, you'll see what that actually is. And if you want to know what it tastes like, tastes like that. All right, so that's Miriam and I on the back of an elephant. And one thing we learned, elephants aren't meant to be ridden. And so if you want to ride an elephant, you have to find a place that really cares for them well. And there's all kinds of things like do they separate the mom from the child? Do they have these baskets on top of the elephants? You never want to do that. You definitely want to ride bareback. So we did a lot of research. It's much more expensive to do places that really care for the elephants, but you know that you're not harming them. So probably one of my favorite things was connecting with our ancestors here. I know they're not apes, but these are gibbons. I spent so much time with these guys. Look how fun. Just so fun. There's that little guy again. And then one more. Hi, Mommy. Now, what's so funny about these things is that, we had peanuts. We had little bags of peanuts in our hands. And this was at a temple. They're just roaming free, And so these monkeys, these gibbons have figured out, my son was giving them one at a time. And it was like, why would I take one at a time when you're carrying a whole bag of peanuts, right? And so, I love this. So first my son got completely abused. He jumped up, grabbed it from his hands, and it was gone. And he was, over there crying, he took my bag. And so my daughter, who's younger than him, he's 9, she's 7, she was like, I'm not going to lose my peanuts. So she holds on to them. But she's tiny, so this thing jumps on her, tries to take the bag, and it won't let go. And so I kid you not, slaps her on the face. When she goes to do this, it takes the bag. So, amazing. All right. Okay, now, one thing you have to appreciate when you're in another country, especially in Asia, unfortunately, are signs and just the transliteration into English. So I'm just going to show you a few I think you'll appreciate. What? I'm not really sure what's saying. Okay. Be slipped down. How about this? Don't wear any clothes like this decisively. In other words, be very indecisive in how you wear them. This was one of my personal favorites. And then, yeah, right. And then one more that I think you'll appreciate. The heartwarming toilet may make you feel relieved, secure, and comfortable. I never heard of a toilet described as heartwarming. This next one is cool, also transliteration that isn't accurate, but justice is the great interest of man earth. You can tell what they're trying to say. So just one more, even McDonald's over there doing the eye, isn't that very cool? And yep, that's it. So. So I just want to leave some time. We can just interact a little bit. Any thoughts, questions? I have one for you in a second. Sylvia.
What did you learn from Buddhism?
From Buddhism?
Yeah.
Buddhism actually, one of the big things that I thought about, do you know what problem Buddhism tries to solve? Suffering. So it gave me the question, so if Buddhism is meant to address the issue of suffering, what are the problems that other religions are also trying to address? Because when you think about it, every religion has its own problem that it's trying to address. So who can tell me, what do you think the problem is that Christianity tries to address? Huh? Say it. You're not going to get graded on this.
Evil.
Evil? Okay. So death, we know, because resurrection is the central idea, right? Evil encompasses, I think, most of this. But what about also reconciliation, right? So think of Jesus' message. Be reconciled to one another. Be reconciled to God. So those are the main issues that I think Christianity are trying to deal with. How about Islam? Who can tell me what's the issue that Islam is tried when it came into existence to address? What do we know about Islam? Go ahead.
I can't put it into a single word, but it was trying to address the corruption of the Catholic Church at the time, and to also provide a formal religion for the pagan groups.
Yes. So there was a ton of paganism, right? And it was an enlightenment issue. So if you think about Islam, it was all about bringing enlightenment and this idea of not many gods, but one God, right? Is bringing everyone back. So what's so interesting is if you think about every religion and what it was started with, and you ask yourself, so how is it doing now? Islam, how is Islam doing at bringing enlightenment to the times? Or how is Christianity in addressing reconciliation? So Buddhism was really interesting to me in that it got me to think about kind of my own lens. Another thing I really love about Buddhism is such a gentle philosophy, and it's this whole idea of letting go and not having attachment. And I've said this for a long time. I feel like for me, Jesus is my guru, right? Jesus tells me what it is, what the ultimate kind of thing that I'm working toward is. Unfortunately, I don't think that the New Testament gives us a ton of tools for how to get there, right? So, for example, forgiveness. Forgiveness is great, but how do you actually get over the anger, the animosity, that like feeling of injustice? So I think that Buddhism can come as a companion and talk about, being mindful of your emotion, not pushing the emotion away, but actually sitting with it, and then non-attachment is a big piece. So I feel like there's a lot of congruency between the two.
But then you gotta look at Myanmar.
Yeah, no one's perfect, right? She said you got to look at Myanmar also. So, all right, another question or two?
Where else did you go in Thailand?
So those of you who've been there, we were in Bangkok. We went up to Chiang Mai, and then we took this like windy road, everyone in the back throwing up, a thing up to a place called Pai. And Pai was much simpler. Some of you know this, but before we left to Thailand, I was in a motorcycle or a scooter accident. My son ended up falling off, and it was just a mess. No one got super hurt, just some road rash and stuff. But I ended up selling my Vespa. It was so sad letting go of that thing. So what was cool about being in Thailand is that everyone knows how to look out for scooters. So we rented scooters. Tannery was on one, then I had the kids with me. And I kind of had like my last hurrah with these things, just like in like developing world traffic. So that was awesome. Then we went down to the Gulf of Mexico, and we were on this island, Gulf of Thailand, and we stayed on an island called Koh Tao. And again, really like I felt safer there with my kids, just letting them go all over the place than I do here. So the kids would walk around the island by themselves. We'll see you guys in 3 hours, take a watch, whatever. So really great. And then we ended up going to this, the largest nature preserve in Thailand called Khao Sok. And we did that for a couple of days, just hiking and stuff. And we saw gibbons in the wild, And by the way, crickets sound different there. They sound amazing. I wish I had set that up. I would let you listen to it. And then back to Bangkok. Bangkok was my least favorite place. It was just like really messy and all that. Yeah. So, anyone else? Last one, Becky.
So going back to the purpose for the sabbatical that you started with, I guess I'd ask you, Sari, what are you bringing back, or what's your takeaway? Were you able to experience those things?
Yes. Thank you for asking that question. I was hoping someone would. So I feel really refreshed and rejuvenated. I've come back, I don't know if you can tell already, I don't know what happened to me, but I've come back with a passion for social justice. And I feel like it's time for us to do something as a church. And I want us to talk more about it and shy away from it less. One of the big things, now I'll be vulnerable with you, one of the big things I came out with is never preach. Don't preach to please. Don't preach to please. To please people. Do you hear me?
I do, and my question would be, given what you said earlier today about this one idea about preaching only good news, how do you
Work with that.
Yes.
I think that we've had enough trust built over the last 7 years that I feel like I can incrementally talk about things that take us slightly beyond our comfort zones without there being an erosion of trust there. I also feel like doing justice to this community means that we need to be mindful of the ways in which we might be shortchanging ourselves as a church. And one of the ways in which we do that is when we are inward looking and not outward looking. And so I really believe that this whole idea of abundant life, I said this last Sunday, someone asked me, what's your lens for your interaction with people? And I just knew it, but I don't know why it hasn't come out enough. So this idea of abundance, I really believe in that, not a scarcity gospel, but an abundant gospel. So what does it look like for us to be abundant in our giving and in our generosity? And to be honest with you, like one other piece, and I'll let you guys go. My wife would probably say an amen right now if but like I have a tendency to be perfectionistic, and my therapist would say, and of course that comes with being controlling. You know that, right? And so where that comes out is that it's a lack of tolerance for more messy things. So where I came back is like, yeah, I'm going to sit back, and there are all kinds of ideas coming up. People are passionate about things. Instead of saying, no, we have to have one thing, and let's just make sure that it looks like this, and all that. I think I've come back with this desire to just say, great, if you can find 5 other people who are interested in doing that, run with it, instead of like, let me see how I'm going to let you down nicely, or I don't have energy to do the work. So it's like, I don't have to do everything. If there's energy, let's see how we can work with it. And that kind of messiness has to do with, letting go. But it's kind of liberating so far, the last 2 weeks. I'm like, Jonna, let me know where the perfect is becoming the enemy of the good, And I haven't fully processed. I mean, I can sit here and talk to you for hours and hours about things that I've learned. A better way is for you to just feel it, over time. I also haven't processed it all entirely. And I think it's going to take me several more months to really soak in. One quick thing, the way my doctorate works is I have another set of classes next summer. I think I'm just going to use my continuing ed to do that, and then take my next 3 months of sabbatical, to complete, in the summer of 2019 to write my doctoral thesis. And then I'll hopefully do my oral defense in April of 2020, and then I'll be done. So.
What order did you do the trip in? That might be helpful.
What now?
What order did you do all of this?
I did Italy, and then I did my 3 weeks, and then I did Thailand. So, thank you, everyone. Blessings to you.